So, if you guys are unaware, baseball starts Friday as of July 22nd. It's going to start on July 24th. At least that's when the Braves start. And since most of my elite profiles are done, I was just gonna give you just to give you an understanding of all the players in baseball that I would consider elite, that are in the MLB system, that I'm aware of, that I would deem as elite, and as I feel like most baseball fans would also deem as elite based off of numbers, accomplishments, what they've been able to do, especially at their age in the MLB, some of which and one of which being a prospect. But I mean, I'll really get into it so you can understand, you can really pick my mind and see how I see the major league, and I'll even break it down by position. How you guys doing? It is Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020, out here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to break down all the baseball players I considered elite, just like I said in the beginning. So first, the only player that isn't officially on an MLB roster right now, the only MLB prospect that I have on this list is 19-year-old Wander Franco, who's been considered the number one hitting prospect in baseball since either last year or the year before, when he was still a teenager. And there are grown men that are in the triple A's and the double A's that end up being great players, but they still weren't rated as high as a prospect as Wander Franco, which makes me believe that with all these scouts, with all these MLB scouts that are watching all of these minor league baseball games, that have seen all these players go through the minor leagues and see them become Hall of Famers, if they're all saying that Wander Franco is the best prospect out of every single prospect in baseball at 19 years old, gives me reason to believe that Wander Franco is elite before even making it to the MLB. That's my reasoning behind that. I haven't seen him play, but for this one, I'm taking the words of the scouts. But for how young he is, and the fact that he's already rated as like the best hitting prospect in the minor leagues, despite the fact he's only a teenager, I imagine if the season was full, he probably would have been brought up by the end. I don't know if they're gonna bring him up. I don't know if the Tampa Bay Rays are gonna bring him up this season. I imagine they'll bring him up next season sometime when he's 20. But Wander Franco to me is the only player that isn't officially on an MLB roster that I haven't seen with my own eyes, that I would have to I'd have to say, with these guys vouching for him, he has to be elite. Like, he has to be an elite baseball player to be recognized as that good at that young. And then now I transition to the positions. I'm going into starting pitcher. The way I'm going to do this, I'm going to work back in age just so you can understand the generational gap, right? So the oldest pitcher I have on here, who's already goated, Justin Verlander. He has 2 Cy Youngs in the American League. One with the Tigers in 2011 when he won the MVP, and he won one with the Astros in 2019 after he already won a championship. Like I said, he has 2 MVPs, and he now has a championship to his name. I mean, what more can you ask for in a starting pitcher that's had the career that Justin Verlander's had? Justin Verlander's elite. Younger than him, you have 35-year-old Max Scherzer, who's pitching for the Washington Nationals, who was also goated for like Justin Verlander. He was able to win 3 Cy Youngs. He was able to win 1 on the Tigers when he left, and he won 2 with the Nationals as their ace. He has 3 Cy Youngs in 2 different leagues. And I mean, there's not much more you can ask. I mean, he's a reigning champion at 35 with everything that he's accomplished in the league, especially towards the end of his career once he really started picking it up in Detroit. Max Scherzer is one of the elites. I would consider him a GOAT level pitcher. Corey Kluber is yet another elite level pitcher. He has 2 Cy Youngs in the American League, and one of them was fairly recent. Then next, you have another goated pitcher in Clayton Kershaw, who holds Dodger records. You might go down as one of the greatest Dodger pitchers of all time alongside Sandy Koufax. He won an MVP in the National League with his pitching. He's one of the best pitchers in the National League. That the only thing that's missing from his resume is a championship, but still, I think Clayton Kershaw is a GOAT level pitcher at 32 anyways. 32-year-old Jacob deGrom has been dominating since 2014 when he was a rookie. He has 2 Cy Youngs to his name, and as of right now, you can argue he's the best pitcher in the National League. Of course, Jacob deGrom is elite. Moving on to Chris Sale, who's 31, who missed his first All-Star game in a bit. 31-year-old Chris Sale is already a 7-time All-Star, and he's a World Series champion. I mean, there's not much else you can ask. And he's a strikeout leader. He's a guy who he's a threat to go over 300 strikeouts any season he plays in the league. But yeah, that's Chris Sale at 31 years old. I would definitely consider him elite. 29-year-old Garrett Cole just signed one of the richest pitching contracts ever, signing with the New York Yankees at 29. just from that contract and what he's been able to do in the Houston Astros, I consider Garrett Cole an elite pitcher at 29. And then after him, I would say Walker Buehler at 25 is the oldest of the three young elite pitchers to me, because I don't think Walker Buehler, he's elite, but he hasn't hit his peak yet. He hasn't hit his prime, and I think he's very, very close to hitting that. He might hit it this year or next year. But considering that the gap between Garrett Cole and Walker Buehler is about 4 years, I think Walker Buehler is kind of the beginning of the next generation of at least young pitchers. He's showing that he's been able to do it for the Dodgers in the regular season and the playoffs time and time again. And with his numbers, I believe that Walker Buehler is an elite pitcher. I don't know how much longer, but for right now, Walker Buehler is an elite pitcher. Following him, you have 24-year-old Jack Flaherty for the St. Louis Cardinals, who helped lead him into the playoffs. He had an amazing season this year, and I have no reason to think that he's going to stop soon. I think he's a new face of that Cardinals franchise, and he's shown that he's arrived. And then the youngest pitcher that I do have on this list is 22-year-old Mike Soroka, who was runner-up in the National League Rookie of the Year race to Pete Alonso. In his first season for the Braves, he still had a sub-3 ERA and was named to an All-Star game at 21 years old, something that not many pitchers in the history of the Major League have done. Between the Hall of Famers and the flops, not many have been able to do that, and I think Mike Soroka is the real deal. Maybe because I'm from Atlanta and I actually watch all the games, but I think Soroka is a very consistent player that if he's dominating this early at 22, Mike Soroka could very well be a dominant force in this league. But he hasn't done much. He's only 22, but he's the youngest starting pitcher that I would consider elite. Those are the starting pitchers those are the pitchers I would consider elite. Verlander, Scherzer, Corey Kluber, Clayton Kershaw, Jacob deGrom, Chris Sale, Garrett Cole, Walker Buehler, Jack Flaherty, and Mike Soroka. The only relieving pitcher that I have on here is Josh Hader. He's 26. He pitches for the Milwaukee Brewers. To me, he's the most intimidating pitcher in all of baseball. There was a season in which in 81 innings that he pitched, he had 143 strikeouts. 204 out of 243 possible outs, 143 of them were due to strikeout. I think that's probably one of the biggest flexes in all of baseball, especially as a pitcher. And the Brewers did make it deep into the playoffs with how many games Josh Hader was able to win for them as the reliever. And because of that, I think he's the only elite relieving pitcher in all of baseball. And now he's the closer for the Milwaukee Brewers. And the Milwaukee Brewers, in addition to Christian Yelich, I feel like one of the reasons that they are NL contenders is because they will always have Josh Hader in their bullpen. Better than any other pitcher that any other team has in their bullpen. Going on to the position players, moving in at catcher, I don't think there's an elite catcher in baseball. If JT Realmuto is the best catcher in baseball, I don't think there's an elite catcher in baseball. The last one was Buster Posey or maybe like Joe Mauer, and these are putting up like MVP seasons. But considering JT Realmuto, even at his best, isn't even close to the conversation of being one of the best baseball players or being like a best baseball. I don't think he's elite. I think being the best player in your at your position doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're elite as well. But with that, I digress. I'll move on. Moving to first baseman. Going from oldest to youngest, I have three listed first basemen. First, I'll start with 32-year-old Paul Goldschmidt, who has been kind of dominating most of the 2010s with the Arizona Diamondbacks. He is now playing for the St. Louis Cardinals, where in his first year they made the playoffs and beat the Braves in the first round, the farthest Goldschmidt has ever gone in the playoffs. He's only 32 and at a position where you don't have to move much, and he's very good defensively, and they're going to add the designated hitter. I think Paul Goldschmidt's going to age pretty well in the MLB. Following him, I have 30-year-old Freddie Freeman for the Atlanta Braves, who also in the 2010s has been doing his thing. He hasn't really been on a playoff contender. He hasn't really been the main force on a playoff contender until Ronald Acuna and Ozzie Albies and Mike Soroka started to make their presences known. They've won the NL East the past couple of years, and considering it's a very tough conference, that level of difficulty is kind of crazy. I commend Freddie Freeman for everything that he's done up until now. But to me, I think there's his career before he turned 30 and his career after he turned 30, and he just turned 30. He's that elite right now, and I don't even think his career is really taken off. And then following him, the youngest elite first baseman is 25-year-old Pete Alonso out of the New York Mets. He's only played one season in the league, but he still had 52 home runs in his rookie season. I think he was the home run contest winner. Even though they didn't make the playoffs, Pete Alonso had a very impressive rookie year despite being 25 years old when he first made it to the MLB. To me, I think it was more impressive than Aaron Judge's, considering like what he was able to do, how young he was, and the fact that he wasn't on the Yankees. But those are my three elite first basemen, being Paul Goldschmidt, Freddie Freeman, and Pete Alonso, all in the National League. I do that, and I transition to the second base. I think there's two elite second basemen in all of baseball. First of all, there's Jose Altuve, who for 4 straight years had 200 hits in baseball, which is a crazy unheard of stat. To me, I think he needs another championship he needs another MVP or another championship to be goated. But to me, he's held a pretty strong hold on the best second baseman in baseball, a position that's been kind of lacking within this past decade. But I think we found his heir and who's going to be the best second baseman in all of baseball. And after him is going to be 23-year-old Ozzie Albies for the Atlanta Braves, who just this season led the American League in hits. He led the league in plate appearances too, I imagine. But he still led the National League in hits in his age 22 season. Not much more to say about that. And it's not really much of a fluke considering the only All-Star he made was in the season before this. I like how he's gelling with Ronald Acuna in that young core in Atlanta. I think Ozzie Albies will be a force to be reckoned with in this league. I think when it's all said and done, I think he'll go down as at least the best second baseman in the 2020s. Amazing defense, and I mean he led the league of the National League as a switch hitter. That's all I have to say. That degree of difficulty is incredibly wild. And then I'm just gonna go with the baseball position way, the way they usually do it. I'm gonna go from second baseman to third baseman. And starting from the oldest, I have a lot of elite third basemen. First, I want to start off with 30-year-old Anthony Rendon, who was the who was the best hitter on a team that literally just won the World Series this past fall. He just recently signed with the Los Angeles Angels, and he's only 30 years old. There's a designated hitter in the American League. It'll take him a second, I think, to get adjusted to American League pitchers, but Anthony Rendon is still an elite third baseman. There's no reason for anyone to think that he's not. Following him, I have 29-year-old Nolan Arenado, who will go down as the best third baseman of the 2010s, at least since he stepped in. He's won every single Gold Glove available since he's been in the league. He's won almost as many Silver Sluggers. He's been an all-star at third baseman. I mean, ever since he's really held that role as the best, he went from the best defensive third baseman to the best all-around third baseman in all of baseball. I imagine he's going to leave the Rockies soon, but I still consider him an elite third baseman for what he can do on both sides of the baseball, despite his lack of playoff appearances with the Colorado Rockies. Following him, I think 28-year-old Kris Bryant is still elite following his 2016 season in which he won the MVP in his second year in the league, and he led the Chicago Cubs to the World Series, and they won it. That was their first championship in over 100 years, and Kris Bryant was the man on that team. And in every full season since, Kris Bryant has been able to put up all-star level numbers. I'm not sure if he's going to stay with the Chicago Cubs through this season, but I do consider Kris Bryant one of the league's elite, especially at third base, and he's one of the few players to win season MVP and be the best player on a championship team in the same season. It's really tough. But following him, I have 28-year-old Manny Machado, who has been a phenom since he's gotten to the league with the Baltimore Orioles. The one time he was on the title contender, I mean, he got them to the World Series, but they just couldn't finish it out. Now he's in the second year of, I think, a 10-year contract with the San Diego Padres, which I thought was probably one of the smart long-term moves because he's only 28, and the Padres have have one of the best young farm systems and incoming talent, crops, yields in the MLB. So I think that this pickup might be incredibly smart for a player such as Manny Machado, who's at this point of his career, but I still think he's an elite third baseman for what he's been able to do in the American League, despite being on the Orioles, what he's been able to do. Following him, I have 27-year-old Matt Chapman, who was just named the best defensive player in baseball the past couple of seasons in Oakland. He can hit incredibly well too, but he's mainly recognized as a defensive player, and because he's recognized as the best defensive player in baseball, or by a lot, I would consider him elite in that aspect. I mean, that's one side of baseball. That's literally half the game, and he still was able to rake this season, which was more than enough justification for me to put him on this list. And following him, The sixth third baseman on this list is 26-year-old Alex Bregman for the Houston Astros. That literally looked like he took the spot from Jose Altuve as the best hitter on that team. He was an MVP candidate. Of course, he didn't win, but he put together an amazing season. And he has a clutch hit down this, he has a memorable hit in a World Series game. He already has a championship. As of this point, to me, he has to win a couple of MVPs for me to really be like, oh, wow, he's a GOAT level player. But Alex Bregman, I think, is already ahead of some of the third basemen I've already named, and he's only 26. And following him, the last third baseman I have on this list is 21-year-old Vladimir Guerrero Jr. for the Toronto Blue Jays, who in his own right, when he was coming up, was the top prospect for like a couple of years. He's the son of Hall of Famer Vladimir Guerrero, who played for the Angels and the Expos and all that. But Vladimir Guerrero Jr., it's taken him a second to adjust to the MLB. I mean, at first he sucked, but he slowly got it back together. Like you saw him in the home run derby. Really, he's doing his thing, and in this first half season in the league, I truly believe that he'll turn this around. He'll be an all-star this season. I think this will be the year he starts inflicting pain on the league, and he's still only 21. A lot of all-star players don't get moved up until they're like till their age 23, age 24 season. I think Vladimir Guerrero can definitely do it, and he's one of the younger players in this era of let the kids play baseball. Other than Wander Franco, he's the youngest player in the MLB that's officially on an MLB roster that I have on this list. And I have a lot of respect for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I have no idea what his career entails, but for me right now, I do consider him elite, and I will vouch for him. And those are their basemen. Moving on to shortstops, I have a good amount of those as well. But the oldest shortstop I have on my list is 27-year-old Javier Baez for the Chicago Cubs, who's put together a couple of almost MVP seasons ever since Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo were no longer at their MVP levels. But as long as those two have been in the infield with Javier Baez, the Cubs have always been a contender for the crown in the National League. Javier Baez able to do it on both ends, and he's really starting to show. I think he's starting to get to that point of his career where he's now one of the players that the Cubs can truly rely on. And I think he's definitely their hottest hitter right now, I'd say. If I were to put someone in I would say he's their most valuable hitter right now. I'm continuing on the other side of baseball in the American League. There's 26-year-old Francisco Lindor, who I think is I think he and Javier Baez are pretty similar in how they play right now. Francisco Lindor, the switch hitter. He was a phenom once he got to Cleveland. He hasn't really taken that next step yet, but he's still only 26, and he still has so much baseball ahead of him. And as of right now, I don't think it's really an argument as to whether he's an elite shortstop. With what he's been able to do for the Indians, help them get as far in the playoffs as he's did with the numbers that he's been able to hit with. Following him, I have Derek Jeter's heir apparent in New York, Gleyber Torres, who at 23 has put together a couple of incredible debut seasons. And it looks like even defensively and offensively, he'll be able to not match up to Derek Jeter, but I think if anyone were to be the rightful heir, especially at shortstop, I'm glad it's Gleyber Torres for someone that's as young as he is. Does everything the right way, hits incredibly well. Like I said, he's an elite level defender. He's starting to be recognized as such. I don't even think Gleyber Torres has scratched the surface of his potential. And then the youngest shortstop I have, I would consider elite, is 21-year-old Fernando Tatis, who was one of the front runners for the NL Rookie of the Year award until he got hurt for the San Diego Padres. This dude is straight up electricity. I'm surprised that he was born in 1999, the same year that I was born. For how good that he is in the MLB, I wouldn't be surprised if he was an all-star if he played up until then this season. He's slowly but surely growing into one of the league's best. And I think once he and Gleyber Torres are in their prime, I would probably give the edge to Fernando Tatis. And then Wander Franco is shortly coming up, but he's coming up in the Rays. So Fernando Tatis might dominate the National League because the only other National League shortstop is Javier Baez. And Fernando Tatis might actually dominate the shortstop position in the National League for the next maybe decade. Depending on who gets drafted to an organization in the National League. But Fernando Tatis, to me, is that dude. Those are the shortstops. Those are all the infielders as we move out to the outfielders. Moving into left field, I only have two left fielders. One of them just won the MVP this last season. Christian Yelich, or he won the MVP 2 seasons ago. And he was one of the front runners for MVP with Cody Bellinger this year. Cody Bellinger ended up playing all games, so Cody Bellinger ended up winning the MVP. Christian Yelich missed about 20 games. But there's no way you can tell me right now that Christian Yelich is not elite just by being the runner-up in the MVP this last year after missing 20 games. That should be the argument. And the other left fielder I have in here is 7 years younger, the 21-year-old Juan Soto, who came up with big hits down the stretch. I won't forget those hits to help the Nationals secure the first championship in their franchise's history. He finished second in Rookie of the Year voting to Ronald Acuna in a year that I really think was a bit of a toss-up, but I think deserved to go to Ronald Acuna. But in that same vein, Juan Soto is 21, and he was one of the best players on a World Series winning team, and it's been a very competitive year where they beat the Astros, they beat the Dodgers, they beat the Cardinals. Like, that was a pretty wild run, and Juan Soto was a big part of that. He had big hits down the stretch, despite the fact that he was only 21. I think the league will be Juan Soto's in a bit. I think there'll be within about 4 or 5 years, Yelich is going to pass the torch for the best left fielder to Juan Soto. Moving into center fielders, the only two center fielders I have on here play in the same city. 28-year-old Mike Trout to me is already goated. He's only played like 6 or 7 seasons, and every single season he's been in the league, he's either been the MVP of the American League or the American League runner-up. So out of all the players that play in the American League, the hundreds of players, Mike Trout has either been the best. He's either been the best player or the second best player, and usually the best player would have out of their mind seasons would be like, okay, yeah, we can't give this to Mike Trout. We have to give this to this other guy. That just shows how dominant Mike Trout has been, especially at center field. I think ever since he started, he's been the best center fielder in baseball, and I think up until he finishes, he'll be the best center fielder in baseball. But following him is the National League, the reigning National League MVP, 25-year-old Cody Bellinger for the Los Angeles Dodgers, who just this past season, like I'm saying, had an incredible season where he still batted over 300 despite his second half fall. He had over 40 home runs, a crazy amount of RBIs. The Dodgers had the best record in baseball. No, Cody Bellinger's production most definitely it definitely contributes to wins, and you see it with the Dodgers. He's able to do it in the playoffs. He's able to do it in the regular season. I think Cody Bellinger is scratching this. He's definitely scratching the surface of his potential because he's already won an MVP. I think Cody Bellinger's dominance in the league will be a lot longer than a lot of people think it is. He's an amazing athlete. He's not just a hitter. He plays amazing defense. Now that the Dodgers are moving him out to the center field to make room for Mookie Betts, that's going to be a very scary outfield just because Cody Bellinger's there. And of course, Cody Bellinger's elite because he just won the MVP this year. Moving on to right field. Starting out with the oldest, there's 4 right fielders that I'd want to know. The oldest right fielder that I have on this list is Aaron Judge at 28 years old in the New York Yankees. Considering how iconic his rookie year was, where he almost won the MVP and he was the runner-up to Mike Trout, and how he still when he plays full season with the Yankees, he can still rake once he makes contact with the ball, it's gone. And he's a 6'6". He's still 6'6", 6'7". He's still an amazing outfielder. I think, as an all-around player, Aaron Judge is an elite player for the Yankees. Also, I consider Mookie Betts for the Los Angeles Dodgers, number 27 years. He's still elite. Like, he won an AL MVP in a year where he was the best player when the Red Sox won the World Series. That's a season that very few others can have. And so far, Chris Bryant is the only other player that's had that kind of season out of the players that I've named. There's not much else for Mookie Betts to earn. I don't know if he's going to stay with the Dodgers long term, but I can tell you that he's going to make the Dodgers the NL frontrunner this season just for how much he can do as a baseball player. Following him, I think 27-year-old Bryce Harper is elite. I mean, he's secured a $300 contract. He was the youngest player named to an All-Star game, and I think he was the youngest MVP in the MLB ever. And he's still been putting up like MVP numbers. His production doesn't necessarily contribute to wins like a lot of these other players, but Bryce Harper is still an elite baseball player when he comes up to the plate. That dude's a beast. And then, to me, the youngest elite right fielder after 27-year-old Bryce Harper is 22-year-old Ronald Acuna, which, to me, I think Ronald Acuna will be the player that will be the best player in the 2020s, even over players such as Cody Bellinger, Walker Buehler, Juan Soto, Tatis, Wander Franco. Dude, Ronald Acuna is going to be that player. This last year, he had over 40 home runs, and he almost had 40 steals that season when he really started stealing bases in the second half of that season. With this shortened season, I imagine that Ronald Acuna he will be a candidate for MVP this year at 22 years old. He's the youngest player to hit a grand slam in a playoff game. I mean, that's pretty insane. I mean, he has so many other statistics to his name, but I think he's just being the face of this young Atlanta Braves team with Mike Soroka and Ozzie Albies being the young guns along with him. They're not even in the same conversation. And him being on the same team as Freddie Freeman. Freddie Freeman is the veteran, but I think MLB fans know for certain that it's Ronald Acuna's team. They moved him out to right field, and with the prospects that the Braves are going to get, it seems as though he's going to stay out in right field. He's going to play out a good amount of his career in Atlanta as they have him under control for until 2026 or 2027. But don't get it twisted. Ronald Acuna is one of the league's best players right now at 22 years old. He's not even young elite. That dude is cream of the crop elite baseball. As a cream of the crop elite baseball player, and he should be recognized as such. And I think in a couple of years, he'll take the title of the best right fielder in baseball, even over players like Mookie Betts and Bryce Harper. And then last but not least, you have the designated hitters. The only designated hitter that I recognize in the American League is Giancarlo Stanton for what he's been able to do. And considering he was on the Marlins and he had one of the best hitting seasons, he left the National League and Christian Yelich was the front runner for the MVP 2 years in a row, which shows his dominance, at least in the NL. It's taken him a second to get adjusted to American League pitching, but I truly think that once Giancarlo Stanton plays a full season in New York, it's over. Like, they signed him for $300 million, and I don't know if he's being paid more than Garrett Cole, but there's a reason that he's one of the handful of $300 million athletes in this sport. And I think his presence makes the Yankees that much better of a team. So those are the elite baseball players, at least as I broke them down by position. Now I'll just break them down by team just to give you a good understanding of just the players and how they fit within their teams in this division. Starting with the AL West, the Astros have three. They have starting pitcher Justin Verlander. They have arguably the best second baseman. They have the best second baseman in all of baseball in Jose Altuve, and they have Alex Bregman, who's the rising up and coming young gun, as the Astros look as though they're really going to reign supreme over this AL West. Another team in the AL West that looks like they might have some fight in them are the Angels. Now, in addition to having the best player in baseball, or the best hitter in baseball, the most consistent one at least, they added Anthony Rendon, who is a top MVP votes getter in the National League after leading his team to the World Series, where they would eventually beat the Astros. I like this addition, and now the Angels are looking a lot more dangerous, and those are the two athletes they have. Additionally, on the Oakland Athletics, the only player I considered elite was Matt Chapman, respectfully for being the best defensive third baseman in all of baseball, which definitely is an argument. Following them, Corey Kluber is the lone Texas Ranger following, his recent Cy Young campaigns, but he's the only player on the Rangers that I would consider elite level. Joey Gallo's great, but he can't hit for average. Moving on, the Mariners have none, but that's how you can understand the AL West this season. It looks as though the Astros may win this year. I'm not really trying to predict, but it's just the Astros are the better roster, and they have three players and a couple of others that you would argue that are elite for what they're doing in the league. And now getting to the American League Central, moving into those teams. Starting with the White Sox. The White Sox, to me, have no elite players, but they're still an amazing team with a good incoming farm system with players that are eventually going to get there. To me, Tim Anderson's a year removed. I think he has to play a full season and then still be able to manage and maintain those numbers. And I'm vouching for him. I like Tim Anderson. He's a dog. I like him. Going on to the Cleveland Indians, the only player on the Indians that I still consider elite is Francisco Lindor once Corey Kluber left. And then following that, the Tigers, the Royals, and the Twins. As good as Josh Donaldson is, I think he's past being called elite. I think his last elite season was in Toronto. He was good. He was really, really good on the Atlanta Braves, but I don't know if I would consider him an elite third baseman, putting him alongside the other third baseman that played there, despite him being a former MVP. But yeah, the Central, to me, not as strong as the West, not really carrying elite players like even the Tigers and the Royals. I imagine they probably have something going on in their farm systems, especially the Tigers with Casey Miz. He might eventually be the guy coming up. But I digress. I'll move on to the American League East, starting with the New York Yankees. And of course, on the Yankees, the players that I've, of course, listed, I have Giancarlo Stanton as the designated hitter, Gleyber Torres at shortstop, and Aaron Judge in right field, in addition to their new $300 million ace, Garrett Cole. But that's for the most players that I've seen that are on one team so far. Moving on to the Boston Red Sox, they only have Chris Sale right now that Mookie Betts has officially jetted and left for the Dodgers. Additionally, the Rays have one in their system, which is Wander Franco. I guess that counts as well. Going to the Blue Jays only have one for me. As good as Bo Bichette is, he hasn't proven himself as elite yet. But Vladimir Guerrero is an elite prospect that should be recognized as such. And I think he's still elite, so I'll recognize him. And the Orioles, they have a couple of good draft picks. They just got Adley Rutschman, but I have to see what he looks like on when he gets to the league. But to me, it's just those guys in the American League. That's the American League. And transition to the National League, which I kind of see as a bit better, where I think more of the talent sits. Starting out west, even with the Arizona Diamondbacks, not really containing any of their players, but they're still a good team. I kind of like where they are, but they let go of Goldschmidt. I can't possibly see them back in that hunt, especially in the NL West with the Dodgers and teams like that. Moving on up, San Francisco Giants, to me, have no elite players. I think Madison Bumgarner and Buster Posey are past their elite levels. I think Posey's already a Hall of Famer, but I think his days of being elite are done. I mean, he could surprise me and shock me this year, but as of right now, I think he's really good. But nah, Madison Bumgarner, the same thing. After what he did in the World Series in his mid-20s was mad impressive, but he hasn't been able to consistently show it going in. Now, as I transition to the Rockies to me, as good as Trevor Story is, I think Trevor Story's got to be more like. I think Trevor Story's got to do a bit more, but Nolan Arenado on both sides of the baseball has proven that he's the best third baseman in baseball. And despite the Rockies not making the playoffs as often as they should, Nolan Arenado should be recognized as one of the best baseball players all around in baseball. Moving on to the San Diego Padres, to me, they really only have Manny Machado and they have Fernando Tatis, who play alongside each other in the infield, which could be very, very dangerous. But additionally, one thing to know about the Padres is that they do have one of the best incoming talent crops in the league, as they were competing with the Braves for the best farm system in baseball for a good amount of time, but they couldn't. But as of right now, they're not the team that they are building up to be, but they're still a good young team. And once the Dodgers are done dominating the NL West, the Padres got next. Now going on to the Los Angeles Dodgers, starting with pitchers. They have Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler as starting pitchers, which is unheard. They're the only team in baseball that has two elite pitchers in their lineup, which shouldn't be taken for granted. They also have Mookie Betts and Cody Bellinger in the outfield, which you could argue are two of the best hitters in baseball. And that's what the Dodgers are dealing with. They have two of the best hitters and two of the best pitchers in all of baseball, which makes them very dangerous. And there are a lot of players in their lineup that I didn't name, but they're still very, very good for how they are in the league. I think because of this, the Dodgers are the front runners in the National League. And none of these players should be taken for granted. Just to give you an idea for how the balance structure in the NL West lies. You have all these other teams, but the Dodgers are officially that team. Moving on to the NL Central, there are no players from the Cincinnati Reds or the Pittsburgh Pirates. I imagine they're rebuilding teams, just trying to figure out what they need to get back into that title run, into that conversation. Moving on to the Brewers, the only elite players to the Brewers on the Brewers for me are Christian Yelich, who of course is in the MVP conversation back-to-back years, not much else more to be said, and Josh Hader, who I said is the most intimidating pitcher in all of baseball. I think those two combined have made the Brewers at least wild card contenders or playoff contenders within the National League over the past couple of seasons. And following their league, of course, there's the St. Louis Cardinals, who are definitely on the way up as well. They have the new face of their pitching rotation, who is Jack Flaherty, who's only 24 years old, and I think he's going to be there for a very long time. And they also have the best first baseman in baseball, arguably, in Paul Goldschmidt. who has been, I mean, who's had an instant impact for them, and they've made it. They made it to the NLCS this past season. I mean, they completely didn't miss a step after adding Paul Goldschmidt and having Jack Flaherty ascend as one of the league's best pitchers. They're just such a well-run organization that is it's never fair to fully count the Cardinals out until they're officially out of the playoffs. Moving on to the Chicago Cubs, because they still have players from their championship level, from the championship team. They have Craig Kimbrell, who is in their bullpen, who I think is one of the best closers. And to me, he's the only closer that I would really consider elite that isn't Josh Hader for what he's been able to do longevity-wise until he got to the Chicago Cubs. He's only been there for the second half of his season. He wasn't incredibly good, but I think he should, this season, if he gets a full season, Craig Kimbrell is going to be ridiculous. Also, they have Chris Bryant on the infield, who's one of the few players in baseball that can say he's won an MVP the year after he won the Rookie of the Year. And additionally, he won the MVP of the year. The Cubs ended their 100-year drought. And additionally, in the infield, he shares that infield with Javi Baez, who, when Chris Bryant and Anthony Rizzo really kind of dropped off, he's really jumped up to claim that role as the best hitter on that team and one of the best two-way shortstops in the league. And right now, he's only 27 years old. So that's the NL Central, I'd say, among the Brewers, the Cardinals, and the Cubs. They're pretty even when it comes to at least elite talent. And, of course, to finish off with the American League East, starting off with the Marlins have no talent. I mean, they literally had Marcell Ozuna, Christian Yelich, and Giancarlo Stanton in the same outfield, and they all left. They have nothing to really show for it now, but they're really trying to rebuild their team completely. We'll see when the Marlins are finally back in the picture, but this year is not going to be it. Moving up, you have the New York Mets, even the New York Mets, they're the fourth best team to me in the National League East, and they still find a way they still have one of the best, arguably the best pitcher in the National League, Jacob deGrom, as their ace, and they have Pete Alonso, the reigning Rookie of the Year, as their best hitter to show they still have two elite young players two elite players in their organization. Following them is the Philadelphia Phillies with Bryce Harper, I think, is their only elite player. I think they have a very good hitting lineup from top to bottom. And Aaron Nola had one really elite season. But to me, I think the Phillies have to really put it all together for them to really make me fear them as a title contender. But to me, Bryce Harper is their only elite player. And he's being paid as such. Moving on to the Braves, because the Nationals won the title. The Braves have four elite players to me. They have Freddie Freeman, who is leading the charge, who has been there since he was brought up, and he's been an elite first baseman since. He was there when the Braves were completely terrible, and now the Braves are back up, and Freddie Freeman is now that veteran, and he's a first baseman at 30 years old. He has so many more years to play. The Braves are my team. And starting pitching, they have a 22-year-old Mike Soroka pitching in the bullpen. For how young he's been able to do, impressive. And you can make the same argument for 23-year-old second baseman Ozzie Albies, who may take the throne as the best second baseman in all of baseball. And then you have 22-year-old Ronald Acuna, who may take the title of the best all-around hitter and maybe the best all-around baseball player once Mike Trout is done. But who knows? That's the Atlanta Braves. That's how they're built, and they won the National League East the last couple of seasons, even over the reigning World Series champions, the Washington Nationals, who now have Juan Soto and Max Scherzer, because Max Scherzer is still arguably, along with Jacob deGrom, the best pitcher in the major leagues, or in the National League at least, and they still have young Juan Soto, who looks like he's going to be there for a long time. So if you see how all these teams are just dispersed, you can see how all these power dynamics set and how they control their divisions, because in baseball, to make it to the playoffs, you either have to win your division or be a very, very strong contender as the second best team in your division. And just seeing just how these elite players fit within their teams and fit within their roles and fit within their own positions in the league, spread them out. You can see how this dynamic can control how baseball turns out. I think it'll be a very fun process to see, just to watch it pan out. But for me, I'm just the baseball fan in the midst of all this. If you really get a chance, just just watch as much baseball as you can, especially in this short season, just to get a feel for it. I mean, it's rare you're going to get an instance to get like a 60-game sample where you can really see like how good these players are. With that said, I mean, I've said my piece. You've heard me out. These are the elite players. We feel like there are players that need to be added. I mean, of course, I'm always here just to listen out and just to keep an ear out for other players that are on this stage, that are at this level. And with that, thanks for hearing me out. Peace out, and I wish everyone the best.